My name is Napa Onwosa. I like to say the Napa Valley was named after me, so take that as you will. And I'm the startup segment leader for AWS. Very excited about the partnership we've had with AfricArena, and this panel is one I've really looked forward to all day. The reason being, when we look at the prevalent STEM skills in Kenya, we're seeing that there are more career opportunities. And the President of Kenya has also indicated a desire to be 100% clean by 2030. But one of the things we have noticed from data and insights is that when you look at countries that don't include diversity in some of their green economy policies, they don't have as much effect and they don't have as much scale as they would have if diversity and inclusion was part of the policy making. So today we have an amazing panel, and we all know that it's a topic that we've been talking about so much in the ecosystem, so we're going to have insights from very different viewpoints. So I'm going to give the panelists time to just introduce yourself before we go into our questions. Laurie, do you want to start?
Great. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Thank you. So it's such a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the AfricArena team and their sponsors for an opportunity to share this time with my esteemed panelists and the audience here. So my name is Laurie Fuller. I'm a venture partner with RAIVEN Capital. It's a global early stage technology fund. I focus on the continent and the Gulf, and we have quite a diverse makeup in the fund, which I really appreciate. I also am an ecosystem builder, so I'm a business coach with Stanford Business School, the Stanford Seed Program, if you're familiar with that, and then also involved with Endeavor and Google for Startups. In addition, I am a LP, an individual on an individual capacity, an LP with an African fund, and a couple funds in Silicon Valley. One is a Gender Lens fund. Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Nadia Seemuth. I'm from Senegal with Jambaar Capital. So I co-founded Jambaar Capital with another, if you can hear me actually, with another female partner. We invest in impact tech startups in Africa at seed stage. Obviously very keen on supporting female founders.
So my name is Kamohelo. I'm a VC associate at Launch Africa, which is a pan-African VC fund, arguably one of the largest and most active, with 133 investments done across 20 plus African countries. And yeah, my role is transitioned from an investment role to now more portfolio support role. Happy to be here.
Hi, sorry, ordered that earlier. My name is Aisha, and I am CEO and co-founder of Farms to You. We're a supply chain technology company that supports buyers like FMCG companies, hospitality brands with improving their procurement processes. We have operations in Nigeria and Kenya, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So welcome, welcome, and thank you all for making out the time. I just want to start with one story from my past. So I've been in AWS for less than a year. And one of the things I kept hearing from the ecosystem was the single-digit funding for female founders. And I was very privileged to be in a pitch session with a VC, and there were two VC partners, both male. We looked at 5 companies, 5 pitches that day, 3 male, 2 female. All 3 male were funded that day, but the 2 female were not. But what was surprising for me was really the questions that were asked for the male founders against the female founders. The male founders, it was very respectful. It was questions around growth. For the female founders, it was more a question of whether they could even do the job, right? So for me, this panel is going to be insightful for me to even understand some of these biases and how the ecosystem has been responding to it. And Laurie, I really want to start with you, because when I spoke to the VCs, the partners in the room, they had no idea that they had spoken differently, right, to the male founders and the female founders. And when I asked, they then realized that maybe they had been a bit too harsh and disrespectful. So what are the things that funds can actually do to identify these biases? And what are the systems they can put in place to kind of mitigate them? What are the processes?
So thank you very much. This story that you mentioned is common, unfortunately, and I believe that this is an opportunity for all of us, right? Regardless of gender, our goal is to make the good investments in good companies based on the product, market fit, and the opportunity that is ahead. So for me, really what I think about is how do we put metrics across the whole deal flow stage, all those stages, so that we understand that we are proactively thinking about diversity. And obviously, for me at least, the first place to start is deal flow. How do we know that we're getting a diverse enough set of deal flow so that we can actually think about other types of businesses and founders that would align with our investment thesis? And so for me, one of the things that I suggest is that we look at unreferred deal flow, right? Unreferred, because we know our network, and research shows that the network is very similar to us. So one way to do that, obviously, is if you're setting up a fund and you're hiring, that you hire diverse people, because the understanding is that they have a different network than you have, and bringing all of those networks together, you get an additive effect. So at RAIVEN, for example, we have women in all stages, all parts of the fund, and we are, because we're a global fund, we're located in different places. So we all bring our network and that deal flow to the opportunities that the fund can then consider. So that's an obvious one. A lot of research has been talking about diversity of teams. A venture fund is included in that opportunity. Secondly, I think it's about, again, this unreferred deal flow. So let's say that as a fund, you have a very high overlap in your network. How do you think about getting deal flow outside of your network? Are you partnering with certain accelerators? Are you partnering with co-working spaces, right? That maybe you can understand good startup companies that are gender focused as well. Do you understand great funds that are focused on gender lens? Do you have partnerships with them where you share potential companies and deal flow? So it does take effort to find this type of deal flow, but if you're purposeful about it and you track at that sales, at that pipeline level, kind of if you've got diverse flow, that enables you then through the selection process and due diligence, hopefully to have that opportunity to be investing in more gender and diverse founders.
Yeah, and I really like the point you made around diversity in the room, right? Not just with the startups, but even the people making the decision to be able to get diverse viewpoints, diverse access to networks. But Nadia, over to you. One of the things we do hear a lot from funds is the pipeline just doesn't exist. And what I'm hearing from Laurie is more a case of being more intentional. But what would that look like in terms of looking for the diverse pipeline?
Well, I agree that every time, or not every time, but a lot of times when this question is raised to people who don't necessarily have a history of investing in female founders for whatever reason, the number one answer you get is, well, we don't have the deal flow, we don't have the pipeline. We're not hearing that from female founders. There's a lot of amazing female founders here today and all across Africa. So I think, and obviously I don't pretend to have a solution or an all-encompassing solution, but what I think, Laurie was right in saying it takes effort and intention. We have to find the founders, we have to tell them to put themselves across that forward, that's true, but also to make sure that as investors you are proactively looking for them, maybe setting informal targets, even if it's just a pledge you do to yourself or to your co-GPs, so that it will give you some sort of like metrics to work towards, and that will enable you to make a more proactive effort, maybe, because obviously when you are bound by numbers, not bound, but even sort of like working toward a number, you make a more proactive effort. We also need all of us, and I'm not pointing fingers at male here, but all of us have unconscious bias. I mean, I'm not an expert at all, but there's just tons of research about how we all choose people in some unconscious ways. So maybe even female investors maybe sometimes have integrated the perception that women are not as good as in like ITC or STEM, or maybe they're not as good as tech, or we don't hear as many successful stories from female founders. So it's also the job of all the investors and everyone in the ecosystem to put forward these women so these perceptions change and the unconscious bias change, I think. But really the thing, to be honest, and I'm just going to put it here, I think finding female founders is very cool, but funding them is even better. What they need is investors' money, so, and not just female investors' money. There's way more male investors in the ecosystem running much bigger firms. So the change is going to come through them, and they have to come on board and help make this happen, I think.
Yeah, I actually like what you said, is not just to find them, right? Because you can create a great pipeline, but you don't have the intention to fund.
No.
So putting a metric on funding would be really powerful, right?
It's
and
just one letter away. It's one letter away from making it. It's just
Exactly. That's really interesting. And just thinking more of Launch Africa, right? Because Nadia, what you're saying is more a case of it's not dependent on the female venture partners to actually find female investors, female startups. It's the entire ecosystem. For Launch of Africa, how has that been? Has there been a deliberate effort to actually increase the diversity of the pipeline and then the funding? And how have you gotten to that stage? How are you pushing past whatever target you've set? If you can share, so that funds that are here that are just starting the journey of diversifying their pipeline would be able to learn some things there.
Yeah, sure. I think we've approached that in a couple of ways, but at its core, it's about removing that implicit bias that you've spoken of, right? So I remember very early on in my career coming across the Harvard Business School report where it said, if you gave a male or a female investor a pitch deck with a male or female voiceover from an actor, 60% of those investors, both male and female, will still invest in the male actor voiceover, right? Which kind of shook me to the core, and I was like, how do we then address this problem? So I think the cool thing about working at Launch is we've put women at all stages of the process. So if you look at our fund, 11% of our LP base are women, 7% of our IC are women, and our chairperson is female, and 40% of our core operating team are women too. So across all of these different stages, you have women in decision-making powers, right? And what has this resulted in? It's resulted in us arguably being one of the largest gender lens investors, and maybe that's inadvertent because of the volume, but the facts show that we've invested in 26 companies that are female-led, or at least have one female within the founding team, right? But I still think that's not enough, because each year when you read the big deal, the stat still remains the same. And we've now looked at that and said, you know what, to move the need in this curve, you need people who are going to wake up every day with the sole intention of investing in women, right? So we've launched 535, which is our sister fund, and this is a $30 million fund with the sole mandate to invest in females. And what they've done is increased access by reducing the minimum amount to invest as an LP, right? So they've taken that need to be a professional investor that has been an historical barrier for women entering into these funds.
Yeah, and I don't think you should downplay the amazing work Launch Africa has done, you know, using the gender lens. And I think it's even a mind shift for me to think the same pitch deck, but with a male voiceover got funding. I mean, that's huge, right? So being intentional, like Laurie said, of making sure that the fund itself is diverse, even before looking for the pipeline and being intentional to move the needle year over year, right? So Aisha, we've been talking a lot about how VCs see startup female founders. How has your experience been? Have you, it sounds like you have a lot of stories to tell, but when I was in the room with these two female founders that didn't get funding, at a point, one of them actually started stammering. She couldn't defend her position because it really felt combative. I don't know what your experience has been and what you can say to a young, early stage startup that's just starting that journey.
Someone actually asked me earlier today, what would be the one important skill that a founder needs? And I said the two for me would be resilience and perseverance, because there will always be those moments where you question, why am I doing this? Why is this so much harder? Yes, these conversations are being had about how certain funds are climate-driven, gender-driven, but then, you know, there's a specific company that their portfolio was 98% male, and then they were like, for the last 3 years, I was looking at lots of the articles. It was things like, we're pro-gender, we're pro-climate, and it's not matching in the sense of, this is what you're presenting yourself as in the public scene, but privately you're having very different conversations. You're asking questions that don't align to these values you're presenting yourself to. And the challenge here is it's not a regulated sector. Before coming into the entrepreneurship sector, I used to work in asset management, and there's some rules that you have to follow. But in terms of how investments are done, how VCs run, you don't necessarily have a big body that's saying that if this is what you're saying outside, this must be what is happening inside. And I think that disconnect is certainly something I've seen. 2 weeks ago, I was with one of our investors, so Catalyst Fund is one of our investors, and we're on a seminar panel where it was myself, Mylis, and Julian Monroe from FSD Africa. I have received funding from Catalyst Fund, which is led by a female managing partner, and Catalyst Fund had received funding from FSD Africa, which is led by a female partner as well. And I think that is a very unusual line, and it goes to Laurie's point of deal flow being diverse, because if you have more diversity at the LP level, at the GP level, at the foundation fund level, then it will trickle down. But I do think there needs to be more accountability in the sense where if you're going to waste founders, so building a company is very hard, don't waste people's time, and I think there have been just many instances where what you just explained is the commonplace. But the numbers don't lie. In terms of the success of female-led businesses, things are looked at with more diversity. They hire more diversity. They are more frugal with how they spend money. And if we look at some of the cataclysmic failures, you would see that from a gender perspective, it's male-led businesses. So I think, yeah, that's just what my experience has been. But be perseverant and resilient, and this is me saying it to other female founders. If one door closes, just keep at it. Because for me, I was lucky to get investors that understood what it is that we're building, and what they present themselves as externally is what they are internally. Because Catalyst Fund, yeah, they do hold us accountable to, you know, what are your impact metrics, how many women have you guys employed, these sort of things. And I think if we have more investors like that, it will make a difference in the ecosystem for sure.
Yeah, I really love the point you said, don't waste our time, right? Building a business is serious business. No shade to the male founders in the room, right? Because there's some data points you brought out. You used a word, cataclysmic failures. Are rarely women. And Nadia, I know you and I were talking about this before the panel, that how come it is that if there's so many great statistics around female founders, there isn't more funding or investment in these startups that are led by women.
But that's what I truly don't understand, because sometimes it feels like people are investing in female founders as if they thought they're very proud of themselves, as if they've done something good, not made a good business decisions. I don't think, I'm not a female founder, but I'm sure many women here will agree with me. They're not looking for charity, they're not looking for pity, they're not looking for pity investment. If we are purely cynical and a very capitalistic world, you get more money on your dollar investing in a woman. So why wouldn't you invest in a woman? Why wouldn't you proactively invest in a woman? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I think we need to repeat that again and again so it drills into the minds of the investors. But also as investors, back to Aisha's point, I think, and I was, actually, it's something that I hadn't really paid attention to before I started raising the fund myself. So we're two female GPs, and for some reason, quite naively, I expected to have more female LPs, but we don't have that many female LPs. We only have 2 female LPs for a fund that's female-led. Even if we're not purely investing in women, we're still female-led, and we still have this thing in mind. So I think we should also make a conscious effort of seeking out more female investors. I know Laurie is one, for example, or like, you know, female who do that. Then she will be able to say, as an LP, I don't understand why your portfolio is 90% male. This is not acceptable to me as your investor. You answer to me. In a way. So I think that would also help accountability, because that would help VC sort of like have a clear, more proactive view on this.
Proactiveness, definitely, and then accountability. That is running through the last few minutes of this conversation, right? But Laurie, would you say that we need more training, right, to get LPs and VCs to this point? Because we do speak a lot about the female founders learning how to pitch, being, you know, strong and continuing, persevering. But are we putting too much weight on the female founders? Shouldn't there be a little bit of accountability on the VCs and LPs to be able to educate themselves? I like what Kamo said around seeing this study by Harvard and how it was a shift, a mind shift, right? So is there any effort within the ecosystem to kind of increase the education and knowledge within this space?
Well, I do think that you're absolutely correct. Money talks, right? And so I think it does behoove all investors to put their money in funds that have an investment thesis and values that align with them, right? So just for myself, and I hope others, as an LP, this is a big part of how you make your decision as to where you want to put your money, right? And then you are in a position to hold them accountable, which I do think is really important. So I think everyone, and I think the point is everyone in the ecosystem has a role to play in holding accountable and promoting diversity for the right reasons, right? Because it's a good business decision. And so I definitely think that we have to be very purposeful when we have that opportunity to use it. If I may, one other thing, because I want to go back to your story and the point that Nadia made also around unconscious bias. It exists. It exists in everything we do, right? It's the human nature, the human condition, if I may say so myself. And one of the things that the research has shown is that there is a difference in how we look at entrepreneurs based on gender. And the way that I would summarize it based on the research is that women are analyzed and evaluated based on performance, and men are analyzed and evaluated based on potential, right? And we just have to understand that if we use processes that are standardized across our due diligence, right, and across our selection, we help understand and hopefully eliminate and look for those biases playing out. How does research know that? They know this because when you're looking at decks online through Carta and others, they are able to track the length of time that you stay on a pitch-specific slide. And what do they find? They find that more time in a female-led slide, female entrepreneur slide, is spent on traction. What have they done to date? And so the focus in a pitch conversation often can be around exactly what you said, protecting what you've done. Competition, how do you de-risk competition, right? And also there is less time spent looking at a slide overall, a slide pitch deck. This has been factually analyzed. So what I recommend to women founders and to women investors, right, is that you support the founders when they're doing a pitch. If someone asks a woman entrepreneur about performance, or they're too focused on that, you answer that question, but you answer the question they did not ask at the same time around the potential of your company and why you're a good investment, right? And we all have to be aware of these biases and support each other in recognizing and eliminating them.
I really like that. So see the business. Because we all have biases, right? So being able to put the metrics in place that you evaluate based on the business and not the person. So we'll be taking questions from the audience in a bit. Just for you, Kamo, I wanted to ask, this is great advice to female founders. You know, if they ask you a question, make sure you respond to the question, but also answer the question they didn't ask. In your experience, is there any other like 1, 2 things that you would say when a female founder is pitching that would be great advice for them to keep at the back of their minds as they go into some of these difficult situations?
Top of mind, I can't think of anything. But I think there needs to be a motion for putting more investors that are like Jambaar Capital in rounds, right? Because a lot of rounds are because the founders have, the investors have access to that round. So there needs to be sort of diversity riders that are put into place that say, hey, look, a portion of this round has to go to investors that have historically been excluded, so that you're giving more time on access to funds that have that gender lens focus to be able to participate in a round, and it's not just about access.
So intentionality, that's what we're all saying. Number one, intentionality, accountability, and then being aware of the fact that we do need to push the barrier around gender lens. Being able to move forward in the number of female startups that we fund. So Aisha, just again, the same question to you. What would you say would be the 1, 2 advice you would give female founders as they're coming through? And we'll be taking questions in case you have any questions from the audience after this.
I think my key thing is to not take things too personal. Sometimes when you hear investment decisions, I think it's just to be aware, layered by that comment on unconscious bias that Laurie and Napa mentioned. Just remind yourself that that decision is not about you, as much as it is about the system you're operating in and the status quo, and just take it as motivation to see how you can actually change that narrative by building a sustainable business. It might take time to work harder to get to that investable point when you've built traction, but I think it's just starting to, it's difficult, but just disconnect that no from personal feelings and don't just take it as it's a personal attack. I think that's one of my biggest learnings. Yeah.
100%. So we'll just do a quick run through. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing in the ecosystem, please don't mention a person. Yeah. What would it be? Laurie, we can start with you.
Well, I think it goes back to money talks. And I think anyone who's investing in funds has a fiduciary responsibility to be thinking about this in a meaningful, purposeful way.
I'd make all investors I'll bound them to have to invest X% of their portfolio into female-founded companies. I'm not saying 50%, but I'm sure we can get somewhere acceptable to, I mean, as a starting point.
Yeah, I think for me, it's having innovative risk assessment models to be able to make investments, right? Because when you're investing this early, you're using the founder as a proxy, right? And there's often not a lot of business data to inform that decision. So there needs to be a shift towards finding other sort of metrics that you're using to on-lend the capital.
I think my biggest thing would be more accountability and governance in how money flows. I understand why biases exist with investors, you know, coming from an asset management background as well. It's their money after all. So when this money is changing hands, and when I say accountability, this is not just on the investment side, it's also how founders spend money. Because if we have more transparency in that flow of capital, you can build the investor confidence in the sense where an investor is making an investment decision, they have increased visibility of how that money is being spent and how the flow, you know, from the foundation to LP, GP level, to the portfolio level, that it's been fiduciary responsibility for the shareholders is being maintained at each time. So I think more accountability and governance on flow of capital would be my thing.
100%.
Wow, nice. I can have a conversation about this the whole time. I've built three companies. I've exited one, sold it for $5.5 million. The best decision I ever made was hiring women. I can do this for like, duh. Any questions before we go to the next one? Questions? No? None? I would regulate it. If I was a politician, I would regulate it. I would make it required for every investment firm to put 30% of their money behind women as a requirement. That's what I'd do. But there's a question over here in one of the back.
Thank you very much. So, my name is Divine. Before transitioning into tech consulting, I had the opportunity for working for an impact fund, one of the fastest growing impact fund in Nigeria. So now during this time, our targets were micro businesses, not the big women businesses. We're trying to get funds for the micro businesses, which were the most when it comes to size in Nigeria. So now the issue we had with those businesses is that it was around funding readiness. Some of those women businesses were not ready for funding. So I don't know if anybody in the panel has experienced that during investing in women businesses or accessing women businesses for funding. And if you have experienced that, are there any ways or you've created to, like, you know, mitigate those issues around, you know, funding readiness?
I can take it. So I think it's across board, right? From my experience, that investor readiness has been both within male founders and female founders. So it's not gender specific from what I've seen. But what we've done at Launch Africa is to leverage partnerships with accelerators that get these companies investor ready. So at the time where we're getting that deal flow, they have the data room in place, they have their pitch deck in place, and all the things that they need for us to make a investment decision.
So my name is Duncan, and I'm from Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund. Mine is more of a comment more than a question. One is just to thank the team for spotlighting women and investment in women. And as an addition to what the gentleman said, if it were him, he would regulate it. I think what I would give it as a word is to be very intentional when it comes to solutioning women-led enterprises. And I think we have enough data points to support that, being able to create specific programs, specific funds that are targeted towards supporting women, because as much as we're trying to solve the challenges around how they are looked at comparatively from the male counterparts, having dedicated funds, having dedicated programs, having dedicated resources to women-based programs has turned out to be a success. And we are happy to see that the conversations are now moving towards the open arena and encouraging the team to continue doing the same. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your comments, ladies and gents. Thank you so much for your time. Let's give them a hand for this conversation. Thank you so very much for that.